Hello, folks. I'm Tim Mendees. Thanks for joining me again. This is my 11th live reading. I'm really excited about tonight. Tonight, I will be reading my story, Fit for the Gods, from the anthology and cookbook. Yeah, you heard that right. Ghastly Gastronomy from Madness Heart Press. I'll tell you a lot more about that later, about the book and stuff like that, and about Madness Heart Press. And I've got some links and things like that. As always, I will be doing a short Q&A afterwards. So if you have any questions, just pop them down in the comment section. Also, there is links to buy the book. Is a cookbook. Did I mention that? In the information of the video, along with my other things like my website and my YouTube thing. Okay. So tonight's story is called Fit for the Gods. And it opens with just before I start, let me just say, there is a little bit of head bopping in this. So what I will do is I will say break when it's a star break going into something else. There's not a lot of it, but what there is, I can't just leave out because it's important to the story. So it should be fine, just bear with me. But it opens with a quote from Ambrose Bierce. In Physica, Baal is still worshipped as Bolus, and as Belly he is adored and served with abundant sacrifice by the priests of Guttledom. A chill, northeasterly wind rustled through the branches of the wizened old elms as the horse-drawn carriage rattled to a halt. Inspector Moore jumped down from the transport and landed with a dull splat in the thick mud. It had been raining for what seemed like years. Winter in Cornwall is often an ordeal. Cursing to himself, he stumbled to release his boots from the sucking soil. Once free, he straightened his tie, pulled his cloak tight around his tweed suit, and gave the ends of his luxurious moustache a twirl. The ride from Truro to Bettles Cove had been grueling. The rattling of metal wheels on rough, rocky roads had left him with a definite kink in his spine. He looked up at the sky with a frown. Thick, dark clouds glowered down upon the crime scene, adding an extra element of the dramatic. Droplets of frigid water ran down his bulbous nose and dripped off the end, landing with a plop in the muddy pools. Just back from the road, a huddle of blue tunics stood over what looked, from a distance, like a bundle of rags. Sergeant Poole had managed to lower himself from the police carriage with a damn sight more dignity than his superior. He then rounded the vehicle and joined the inspector. The two veteran policemen carefully walked over to the scene, giving the worst of the mud a wide berth. A green-faced young constable by the name of Smith spotted their approach and rushed over to meet them. So, what have we got here, Constable? Moore asked. It's horrible, sir. Bloody horrible, the shaken youth began. It's old Sam Worthington's daughter. One of the farm hands from the marsh place found her on the way to work. Gutted like a fish she is, sir. Jesus, Sergeant Poole sighed, crossing himself. Has the doc seen the body yet? Asked Moore. Aye, sir. Do we have a time of death? Doc reckons she's been dead about 6 hours, sir. Though all this bloody rain makes it difficult to be sure. Thanks, Constable, Moore said, checking his fob watch and mopping a mixture of sweat, rain, and last night's scotch off his brow. Come along, Poole. Let's take a look. Sergeant Poole gasped and held a handkerchief to his mouth upon viewing the body. The late Miss Worthington had been ravaged. Her abdomen had been laid open with a certain degree of skill, and her intestines had been lifted from the stomach cavity. They lay next to her like a pile of sausages. Well? Moore asked the shaken-looking police surgeon. Well, what? Dr. Turnbull waveringly replied. Is there... Is there anything missing? Uh, yes, sir. Both kidneys. Moore swore under his breath and motioned to the doctor to cover the poor woman up with an old sack. As thunder rumbled in the distance, Moore stared across the hills pensively. Jim? Sergeant Poole asked gently. Is it the same? Yes, Frank. I'm afraid it is. All Hallows Eve, most places in Britain, brings out more than its fair share of fruitcakes. Middle-aged women hosting wild sex parties, mild-mannered bankers sacrificing chickens, little Johnny Smith covering himself in feathers and gobbling like a turkey. Bettles Cove was now very obviously the home to a much more dastardly kind of nutter, because for the third year in a row, one of the local women had been relieved of her precious bean-shaped organs. The first two victims had been local unfortunates, as the Victorian euphemism went. Ladies of the night, tarts, prostitutes. The removal of the kidneys had been carried out with far less precision than last night's victim. It was as though the kidney thief had been practicing. The Bettles Cove station house was alive with the scurrying and mumbling of raw lobsters. Inspector Moore and Sergeant Poole had taken command of the small briefing room, a handful of peelers and a classroom's worth of blackboards. Dr. Turnbull had scribbled the details of all three victims' mutilations on the largest of the boards with a rapidly diminishing stick of chalk and in a script legible only to takers of the Hippocratic Oath. All three women had been laid open from top to tail, their intestines scooped out and the kidneys neatly removed. The first victim had been an obvious rush job, as one of the kidneys had been dropped inside the abdominal cavity and left behind. The second still had parts of the organs attached, but the third victim had been stripped neatly clean. The killer had switched up his tool of choice with positive results. The knife used in the first two murders had been a short-bladed fishing or cobbler's knife. The fresh cadaver had been carved up with what the doctor postulated a butcher's boning knife. Shall we bring in Tom the butcher then, sir? Asked a young bobby named Jeffries. No need, he's already here, Poole replied. He's been here since closing time. You see, he has a belly full of porter and got in a ruckus down at the Siren's Rest. He's been sleeping it off in the cells since closing time. Still, Moore interjected, it might be worth asking him if he's had any knives pinched or lent any to anybody. Could it be Saucy Jack, sir? Jeffries asked, much to the displeasure of Inspector Moore. Don't be ruddy, silly constable, he bellowed. Every copper worth his salt knows Saucy Jack is safely banged up in Bedlam. But the papers, sir, they say he was never, Jeffries mewed. The papers? Moore fumed. What the bloody hell do they know? Fred Aberline says he's locked up in a nut house, and that's good enough for me. Inspector Moore had turned as red as a beetroot and looked as though he was going to spontaneously combust. This topic was a sore one. As a veteran of the Autumn of Terror, any mention of the Ripper sparked his short fuse into ignition. Composing himself somewhat, Moore asked the room, "Is there anything found at the scene?" An uncertain negative murmur spread around the room. Coppers looked at one another sheepishly and shook their heads. Moore put his hands on his hips and blew air out of his ruddy cheeks. As he started to turn away in despair, the suitably cowed voice of Constable Jeffries piped up once more. Well, there was the sack, sir. The sack? Moore queried. You mean the one we covered her up with? Yes, sir. We found it in the bushes, Jeffries said, brightening. He sensed a career lifeline. Anything to tell us where it came from? Yes, sir. It's from Stanley Mill. It's written on the side. Good work, Jeffries, Moore said, much to the young constable's delight. He turned and scribbled "sack" on the blackboard behind him. Turning sharply like a bloodhound with scent of iron in its nostrils, he poised to address the room. Before he could speak, the saloon doors that separated the front desk from the briefing room clattered off the walls, and a soaking wet constable blundered into the room. "Sir, come quick! There's been another one!" Break. Lard sizzled in the large skillet. The scent of frying onions tickled the young man's taste buds. A pinch of salt and a handful of finely chopped celery, carrots, garlic and scallions were added to the pan. A gentle stir of the stock vegetables, and he could return to the important task of dicing the fresh meat. Break. What Police Constable Smith forgot to mention was that the new victim wasn't human, in the slightest. "It's a chuffing bull," Moore spat. "It's not just any bull, sir," Smith replied. "It's Wilf Jones's prize breeder, sir. Worth a bleeding fortune at auction. Young Ivy was up here picking herbs for her brother when she came across him." Moore looked across at Poole with a look that said, "Bloody yokels," and spoke in measured tones. "I don't care if he's the Pope's prize bull, Constable. A woman has just been murdered, making three. Tell Sergeant Ingram that I told him to get off his lardy backside and investigate this. I have better things to do than look into what is probably a rival farmer tipping the odds before the county show. Come along, Poole. Let's get back to the station." As he turned to walk back down the steep hill towards town, the voice of Dr. Turnbull halted him in his tracks. "Jim, you're going to want to look at this." Moore snapped his head around into a well-practiced, "This had better be good" look. That was on his hands and knees in the cold Cornish mud, his tweeds stained with grass, mud, blood, and cowpats. He extended a bony finger and pointed to the end of a large incision. "I've seen this mark at the end of the cut before, not 3 hours since." Moore and Poole looked at each other grimly. "It's of my opinion that this incision was caused by the same blade that opened up Miss Worthington. This mark is most likely caused by a crack or notch at the base of the blade." Moore removed his topper and ran his fingers through his steely hair. "Was anything taken?" he asked, mentally repeating the mantra, "Don't say kidneys, don't say kidneys, don't say kidneys." "I think so. It looks as though a large portion of meat has been skillfully removed. The organs appear intact. I can't tell you for sure what cut has been taken, as my speciality isn't bovine anatomy, as I'm sure you understand. But I would say the fillet, perhaps." "Most expensive cut, sir," Constable Smith helpfully interjected. "Smith," Moore began, "get back to town and get Ingram and some of the others up here with a trolley. I want this bull taken to the morgue." Smith gave a snappy "sir" and raced down the hill, slipping and sliding in the mud as he went. "Inspector!" the doctor gave a sharp cry. "Take a look at this," as he lifted the loose flank of the beast. He pointed his skeletal finger at a dusting of white powder. "Flour," he asserted. "Flour in the wound, flour sack by the body. Name on the sack. Come along, Poole. I think we need to talk to Mr. Stanley, don't you?" Break. Sieve the flour. The finer, the better. The last thing you need is big gluey clumps. That's what ruined the last one. Add sea salt and crushed peppercorns to the flour. Mix in the finely chopped herbs, then add the meat. Break. The Stanley Mill stood alone on a stretch of the River Camel, just outside the sleepy village of High Bend. It took around 30 minutes for the carriage to navigate the flooded roads. Torrents of muddy water had burst the banks, swamping the area and dragging foul-smelling weeds onto the byway. As the horses came to a stop and stamped their hooves in the mud, it became suddenly clear that there was trouble at mill. Mrs. Stanley, a matronly lady with a bosom like a beach ball, came hurrying towards them, waving her arms around like a whirling dervish. "Officer, officer," she wailed, in a voice that would have made a banshee wince. "It's my Alf. Some bugger's clobbered him." The two officers leapt down from the cab, covering Moore in wet filth once again, and hurried over to the cottage next to the mill proper. Alf Stanley sat in a rocking chair with a bandage wrapped tightly around his bald head. His eyes rolled and bobbed, attempting to focus on his visitors. The local quack from High Bend mopped his brow with a wet flannel. Moore's hopes of having a good suspect were dashed in an instant. It was clear that he'd been knocked for a loop. Dr. Waite confirmed that he'd been with the family since just after 11 the previous evening. So that was that. Concrete alibi. Dr. Waite had been settling down to supper with his wife when a rigorous banging on the door made him drop his bread in his soup with a splat. It was Charlie Stanley, Alf's 12-year-old son. He urged the doctor to come quick and went racing back up the road. Slowly, the story was relayed to the two stout coppers. The wind was fierce the previous evening, and a particularly vicious gust blew the mill door open. The Stanleys were in bed, but the horrific banging of the heavy oak door on hard stone rudely awoke them. Alf grumbled and cursed. He was filled to the brim with strong ale, pheasant, spuds, and gravy. He rolled his ample frame out of bed and groped for the oil lamp on the bedside table. Once the room was illuminated, he pulled his slacks over his woolen long johns and pulled on his great coat. The door swung in the wind as Alf approached, grumbling and belching, trying to rid himself of a painful balloon of indigestion. He grabbed the door and began to pull it closed when he was alerted by a furtive noise from within. "Hello?" he barked. Nothing answered. Alf grabbed a rusty pitchfork from next to the door and went inside, muttering about damn rats and useless cats. He swung the oil lamp around the room. A shadow loomed upon him from behind, and a swift and powerful blow felled him like a dead oak. Poof. When Alf hadn't returned from a disconcerting length of time, Mrs. Stanley roused Charlie and sent him looking for his pa. Charlie found his dad lying face down in a pile of horse droppings, and for a moment thought his distinctly rotund father had suffered a heart attack. Upon closer inspection, however, he spotted the slowly weeping duck's egg on the back of his head and the half brick on the floor next to him. "Did the intruder take anything?" Poole asked the boy. "Just a couple of sacks of flour, sir," the young boy replied. Break. Gently brown the meat in the fat, then add the cooking liquor. Push the stock vegetables through a fine sieve, then add to the pot. Gently bring to the boil. The young man repeated the recipe like an incantation, biting his bottom lip in anticipation. Break. The wind and rain hadn't let up in days. In fact, it seemed to rise to almost biblical proportions. Moore and Poole were cold, wet, miserable, and downright cheesed off by the time they got back to the station. The night was drawing in, and the fuzzy glow of the gas lamps through the windows looked warm and inviting. "This is an outrage," a voice boomed as they entered the station. The mayor of Bettles Cove, Thomas Edwards, was a slight man with narrow eyes and a thin pencil moustache, which gave him a weasel-like appearance. He stood in the centre of the room, bellowing like an angry boar. "What the blue blazes are going on, Ingram?" Moore yelled over the din. "I'll tell you what's going on, Inspector," Edwards interrupted, flecks of spittle forming at the corners of his mouth. "Some scoundrel has pinched a priceless bottle of wine out of my study. It was to be a gift to Queen Victoria herself. And this oik," he jabbed his finger at Sergeant Ingram, "says that you are too busy to catch the bounder. It's an outrage, I tell you, a bloody outrage." "Do you have any idea who took it?" Poole asked calmly. "Isn't that your job?" Edwards blurted in response. "Look," Moore boomed, his temper reaching boiling point. "We are currently investigating a string of murders. There's been 3 so far." "4, sir," Constable Smith interjected. "What?" "4, sir. The 3 women and Big Jock." "Who the devil is Big Jock, Constable?" "The bull, sir. He was a prize-winning Aberdeen Angus." "Shut up, Smith." "As you can see, Mr. Mayor, we are up to our eyeballs in corpses at the minute, and I'm sure you don't want any more while we are not out on the wild goose chase for a bottle of bloody Vinditable." "Vinditable? How dare you?" Edwards fumed. "If you will excuse me, I've work to do. Smith, take the mayor's statement." "Yes, sir," the hurt-looking Bobby replied. Moore and Poole pushed through the throng of bemused policemen round the fuming politician. Morton was furious. He kicked his chair against the wall and grabbed the bottle of scotch off the shelf. He turned to the picture of the Queen above his desk. "Sorry, Mom," he toasted. "I'll find your booze when I clear this mess up." He passed the bottle to Poole, who took a welcome slug. The 2 men sat down in front of the boards and stared at a collection of squiggles and rough sketches, desperately seeking inspiration. Jeffries knocked on the doorframe and cleared his throat. "Sorry to bother you, sir, but I think you need to hear this." Behind him loomed the dishevelled form of Tom Drake, the town butcher and chief drunkard. Moore motioned for both men to sit and begin. Jeffries started while Drake sat and looked worried. "I asked Tom here about the knife like you asked, sir, and—" "I didn't do anything," Tom interrupted. "I swear, I didn't hurt no one." "Easy, Tom, relax. You couldn't have done it. You were locked up at the time." "Ah, all right," Tom sighed. "Who'd have thought that being locked up would be a good thing?" He gave a nervous laugh. "Just make a bloody habit of it, all right," Moore snapped. "Anyway, the knives. Tom, what can you tell us?" "Well, I had this apprentice, see? He were great to begin with, real quick learner. Anyhow, he started pinching meat, so I had to let him go. Thing is, thieving little bugger took my knives when he went." Moore's eyes lit up. "When was this?" "Oh, a couple of months back." "Did you report the thefts?" "Nah, I just reckon I'd smack him about a bit next time I saw him." "So who was this apprentice then?" Moore asked, getting the scent once again. "That little scrote Sam Francis." "Hang on, Francis, why does that ring a bell?" Moore pondered. "It were his sister that found Big Jock, sir," Jeffries said. "Right, go and find her. I want to know what she was doing up there." "Collecting herbs, she said," Jeffries responded as he left the room. Inspector Moore's face crumpled into a mask of concentration. The jigsaw pieces were starting to click into place. The gears were turning. The engine was pumping. A gas light of inspiration went off above his head. "Tom, which cuts of meat was Sam pinching?" Beef. Philist steak. Most expensive bloody cut." Break. Once the stew has boiled, remove from the heat, then cover and place in an oven on a moderate heat. Braise for 90 minutes or until meat is tender and the stew thick, smooth and rich. The man was happy with his work. It was looking good. Fit for a king, fit for a god. Next, he had to prepare the pastry. Sam said he'd pay a farthing if I went and got him some herbs, little Ivy Francis said. He said he was making a pie fit for the gods. A pie? Moore asked. Yeah, big pie. He tried making it before but mucked it up. Thanks, Ivy, here's a lollipop. You've been a big help, Moore said, handing the girl a sweetie. Thanks, mister, she replied and skipped out of the station. Moore and Poole looked at each other in disbelief. A bloody pie? Who is this kid, Sweeney Todd? Let's go bring him in, Moore said decisively. Break. The pie was ready. He had rolled out the pastry into a large tin, spooned the steak and kidney filling into the pastry, topped it, crimped it, glazed it with a goose egg. Nothing could go wrong now. All he had to do was bake it. He checked the oven and deemed it ready. With a sense of profound satisfaction, he slid the tin into the oven and shut the door. There was a dribble of wine left in the bottle that he had lifted from the town hall. He savoured its complex taste. All he had ever wanted was very nearly in his grasp. His lord couldn't deny this one. It was perfect. All he had to do was wait. Break. Open up, it's the police, Poole yelled as they banged on Sam Francis's door. Giving up, he rammed his broad shoulder against it, springing it open. Sam's house was nothing more than a hovel, and a disturbing hovel at that. From just a glance, it was clear that he hadn't attended church in a while. The wall was covered in charcoal symbols of a distinctly diabolic and occult nature. Poole whistled as he surveyed the room. The rickety dining table was piled high with reams of notes, letters, and journals. Sam had been a busy boy. Where he had collated all this information from was a mystery that could wait for another day. To one side of the room was a makeshift altar. 2 large candlesticks with thick tallow candles flanked a horrific idol carved from a strange green stone, similar to soapstone. The idol depicted a colossal monolith topped with what looked to be a gigantic winged toad. Bugger me, Moore muttered under his breath. He examined the statue and barely suppressed an involuntary shudder of revulsion. Poole had been scanning some of the papers and gave Moore a nudge. Hey, listen to this. He quoted. According to Ebon, if I am to wake the sleeping god, I must pay him tribute. A gift of food is the obvious choice. He is the king of gluttony, so it must be a meal fit for a god. Christ, Moore said. When was that dated? Just over 2 years ago. Hey, listen to this one. Damn it all. It wasn't perfect. Not enough kidney. That was a couple of months later. And then there is this one from last year. Damn it all, the whore had Bright's disease, and the gravy had lumps in it. It's no good. So, let me get this straight, Moore pondered. This lunatic has been killing women to bake a pie for some toad god. Just beggars belief. Come on, Frank, we need to find this nut job right now. A piercing shriek rang out in the night. Moore and Poole burst out of the house to see a scene that blasted their minds. The town square was bustling with frenzied activity. Women and children screamed and ran. An overturned hansom cab burned after colliding with a gas lamp. The vicar stood on an overturned banana box, yelling about the end of days. Lightning flashed, thunder rumbled, as Moore and Poole stood, mouths agape. Suddenly, something large landed at Poole's feet. It was raining still, but it was no longer raining water. It was raining toads. Big, vicious toads. The batrachian beastie that had landed in front of their very eyes was around the same size as a Yorkshire Terrier. It blinked at them malevolently through bulbous eyes, its bony ridges and taut green skin giving it an armoured, grumpy look. Without warning, the creature sprung towards Poole with its needle-like teeth bared. Before he could shout, "Whoever heard of a toad with teeth?" Poole was fighting to keep the vicious amphibian away from his throat. Moore whacked the toad with the butt of his revolver and helped Poole throw it clear. With a dead-eye aim, Moore let off a shot that sent the toad spinning into the bushes. Moore dusted his friend down and checked that he hadn't been bitten. "What the hell is going on?" Poole cried hysterically. "Hell is what's going on, Sergeant. The end of days," the vicar cried. "The plagues are upon us. It's the coming of the flood." As he babbled, one of the monstrous toads leapt up and fastened itself to his thigh. As its needle teeth embedded themselves deeply into the holy man's flesh, he screamed in agony and pawed at his crucifix, desperately seeking salvation. Before Moore and Poole could act, a swarm of toads fell upon the struggling vicar, snapping, snarling, and chewing. The man's screams were silenced when a sickening gurgle as one of the largest specimens sunk its fangs into his throat and tore. "What are we going to do?" Poole shrieked. "We have to find Sam. This must be his doing." "What? The pie? Well, that's just insane. You don't really think that some madman has raised a toad god, do you? Have you a rational explanation for a plague of giant carnivorous toads?" "Well, no, sir." "Come along, then," Moore barked. "But where to? He could be anywhere. Somewhere with a big oven, I'm thinking." "The bakery!" Poole shouted in triumph, his face lighting up. It was his very own personal eureka moment. The two men fled in the direction of the town bakery, kicking and dodging the toads as they went. As they rounded the corner and the bakery came into view, the sky was lit with a gout of flame. The front window exploded, showering the sodden cobbles with shards of glass. Smoke billowed from the doorway, and the gambrel roofs began to crack and sag. "Now what?" Poole asked dryly. Break. The sleeping god is waking. Nothing can stop Sam Francis now. Soon he will have all the knowledge, all the power, all the respect he deserves. The sleeping god is waking, and he is hungry. Once he has been given the magnificent pie, he will grant Sam Francis boons unimaginable. All he has to do is give him the pie the words. Nothing can go wrong now. Nothing. Break. "Look, over there." Poole pointed to what he initially thought was a sack of flour. But sacks of flour don't wiggle. "Someone's over there. He'll be burnt to a cinder if we don't do something." Moore and Poole raced over, shielding their eyes from the flames. "Grab his legs," Moore commanded, and took the man's arms. "Now, pull him clear." The two coppers dragged the wounded man to safety. Seconds before, a chunk of burning timber clattered to the very spot where he had lain. Norman Travis, the local baker, was in a right old state. One of his arms had been burned quite badly. The skin drooped like melted cheese. "That bastard!" he snarled through pain-gritted teeth. He was having trouble stopping his eyes from rolling due to the large dent in his forehead. "He came in and started chanting. I told him to sling his hook, but he hit me on the head with my own bloody rolling pin. Next thing I know, I'm waking up, my bakery's on fire. Have you any ideas where he went? He went off that way, towards the mud wallows, you know, the swamp down past the church. There's a path. Thanks, Norm. I'll send a quack as soon as I can. Oh, and keep away from the toads. Moore and Poole raced off down the muddy path, leaving the baker bewildered and bleeding. The toads had seemed to congregate in the town square. They smashed into businesses and ate whatever they could find. The mud slopped and slurped as the two policemen pelted down the path. Moore checked his revolver and cursed. He had only one shot left, but it would have to do. Below their pumping feet, the ground seemed to tremble and reverberate. Thunder cracked, but didn't cease. It drew into one long, turgid, bowel-quaking rumble that seemed to coincide with the shaking of the earth. Poole lost his footing on a fallen log and went spiralling into a bush. As Moore helped him to his feet, he heard a noise from just over the way. Shh, he whispered, bringing a finger sharply up to his lips. I think I hear something. Just past the bush that Poole had become intimately acquainted with was a clearing where three tributaries intersected. Sam Francis stood ankle deep in the southernmost stream with his arms aloft and his head tilted back. On a large, flat-topped rock in a dry triangle in the centre of the flooding waters sat the pie, golden and steaming. Words were streaming from Sam's mouth. At least Moore thought that they were words. They were an insane babble of syllables, whoops, and howls. His eyes burned like hot coals, and his body trembled violently. Moore burst from the bushes, his pistol levelled at the crazed youth's head. Put your hands behind your head, step away from the pie, he bellowed. You're too late, Sam chuckled, a wide, insane grin plastered across his pockmarked face. He is waking! His words trailed off into a strange exultation as the ground shook even more wildly. A monstrous splash from the stagnant pond beyond startled the two officers. Huge plumes of muddy water leapt into the sky. The water boiled, bubbled, and rose. It crashed over its banks and flowed towards town in a raging torrent. Poole let out a startled cry of horror as a ghastly shape became visible. Two enormous wings stretched into the sky, taller than the tallest trees. They were attached to a colossal mound of blubber in the vague shape of a toad. Its skin was covered in thick, bristly hairs, and it had what looked like bat ears. My lord! Sam wailed in triumph, holding the pie in the air. The toad god licked its lips with its leathery, bloated tongue. One large, baleful eye opened and fixed on the pie. The beast sniffed the air. Thick globs of saliva dripped from its gaping maw and hit the water with a sizzle. It shifted its bulk in readiness for its tasty treat, but was stopped short. Moore squeezed the trigger on his Smith & Wesson, and the bullet cracked from the muzzle. It scythed through the air, narrowly missing Sam's head by a hair, and burst into the pie dish. Meat, gravy, pastry, and shards of Staffordshire pottery showered Sam. The toad grumbled in anger at his spoiled tribute. Sam wailed and cried. No, he bellowed. Lord Tersogua, eat those who defile your feast. The toad seemed to think for a second. Its orange orbs surveyed the scene. Finally, its eyes came to rest on the one who had woken him, Sam Francis. No, Lord, no, Sam cried in horror as the thick tongue of the toad whipped around his waist. His steak and kidney covered body was tossed into the air and swiftly dragged into the toad's gullet with a gulp. The ground shook anew as the waters seemed to reverse back to the pond. A whirlpool opened, a portal to the muddy depths of the earth. The toad belched in appreciation of its meal and dived into the pool. Warrenpool stared in disbelief as a stampede of giant, toothy toads rushed from the town and followed their master to his world below. Morning broke to a calm and sunny day. Many were dead at the teeth of the toads. None of the bodies remained, as the ravenous creatures had eaten every last morsel. A flood was blamed for the deaths. As far as the world knew, they were washed out to sea when the river burst its banks. The murders were officially listed as solved, and the flood was once more blamed for the absence of a corpse. Moore, Poole, and all other witnesses and surveyors were condemned by the Queen herself, commended by the Queen herself, and later bound to the Official Secrets Act. The locals of Bettles Cove shunned the site of the rising, Toad Rock, as it is now known. Nobody dares visit after dark. The collection of books and papers found in Sam's house was turned over to Cambridge University, where it lies in the Forbidden Books Library. All of Sam's diaries were burned and his recipe lost to time. Thankfully. After all, as the sorcerer Ebon warned, it is best just to let sleeping toad gods lie. The end. Thank you. That was Fit for the Gods from the Madness Heart Press anthology, Ghastly Gastronomy, which is also a cookbook. So, the thing is, I'm really excited about this because a lot of you will know that I was a chef for 20 years. But I've never been in a cookbook before. So, when I saw the call for this one go up, that's how the story came about. I just thought, right, I'm going to have to come up with something. Because the whole point of it was to have a recipe that fits in the story so people can then cook it. Obviously, replacing the illegal ingredients with ones that aren't illegal. So in this case, the human kidneys have been replaced with ox kidneys. So yeah, after that is my recipe called Sathogua's Tribute Steak and Kidney Pie. And in it, I will give you all the ingredients and how you cook it. And I just want to read you a brief section from the bottom because I must have been in a funny mood that day. Okay, spoon the filling into the dish. Be sure to remove the bay leaf. Try to get the filling as even as possible. Roll out the remaining pastry, top the pie, crimp and trim the edges. Poke holes towards the centre of the pie to allow any steam to escape. Then glaze with a beaten egg. If you have any leftover pastry, why not cut some decorative shapes to garnish the pie? In this case, what about some evil flesh-eating toads? I hope somebody's done it. I really do. If any of you guys, actually, anybody out there gets a hold of this, gets a hold of Ghastly Gastronomy and gets the recipe, I want to see pictures of the pastry toads. Okay, so yeah, I will answer some questions in a minute. I will just, there's a few comments. I will have a look. Oh, sorry, we're having trouble playing the video. Can somebody tell me if it's still working? I'll just keep talking. Facebook's had a wobbler again. It's just saying it's done this before, so I'm just going to keep going. Ghastly Gastronomy from Madness Heart Press. It's a lovely little book. Like I say, it's also a cookbook. If you want to get a hold of it, if I get the right prompt card, it is getbook.at /Ghastly Gastronomy, all one word, all lowercase. Chris says, yup, so I'm assuming it's working. Hi, David. Hi, Chris. How many toads have you got? Fingers crossed for a car-sized one. Oh, that'd be awesome. That'd be awesome. I'll have to ask my partner if we can have a giant inflatable toad. Yeah. Yeah. See, this has happened to me as well, Chris. Chris Hewitt comments, nice. Although now I fancy a pie. Yeah, me too, mate. I could really go for a steak and kidney right now. Nice one. Thanks, Tim, says Mike. Loved the toady props. Yeah, he's thinking of a pie as well. What have I done? Karen comments, a Victorian set detective story with your own unique twist. Splendid. Yep. Thank you. That's kind of what I was going for. Because I am an amateur ripperologist. I mean, I've studied the Jack the Ripper case for many years. I have a collection of books on it. I have some really quite rare poems on it. So when I thought about what recipe I wanted to include, which was steak, I just thought, well, it's an American publisher, and I thought, well, let's get a good British classic on it, steak and kidney pie. So, and I just thought, right, steak, kidney, Jack the Ripper. It just kind of, yeah, it just kind of wrote itself, really. Oh, cool. Yeah, it's all working fine. Then just a couple of minor glitches. To be honest, I can't see many more comments, so I'm going to start wrapping it up anyway because it is being a bit twitchy. For all you people who are watching on the Madness Heart Press watch party, if you have any questions about the story, or if anybody watching it here, or even when I put it on YouTube, just ask the questions in the comments section, and I'll answer them when I see them. I will answer them at some point, because obviously I can't see what people are writing on the Madness Heart thing now. Okay, so once again, that was from Ghastly Gastronomy, which is a horror anthology and cookbook, recipes and stories for the discerning diner. I love it. Absolutely love it. And you can get hold of that from getbook.at /Ghastly Gastronomy. This video, along with my previous 10, are all available on my YouTube channel. Please subscribe and all that kind of good stuff. I'm also doing a series of interviews. I did my second one earlier, and it was really good fun. So if any authors out there want to come on to After Hours, which is an informal chat like a virtual pub, just get in contact with me. I'd love to have you on. But anyway, my YouTube channel is tinyurl.com /Tim Mendees YouTube. And finally, last one, promise, high-tech Amazon cards. My website, where you can keep up to date with everything, is timmendeeswriter.wordpress.com. Okay, thank you again. I will probably be doing another one very soon. Before I go, there's a quick question. Who was Jack, in my opinion? My favourite is actually a guy called James Berry, who he was in Whitechapel at the time, and he left just after, because I mean a lot of people talk about the canonical five, but I don't think Smith wasn't part of it. I don't actually think that Liz Stride was a Ripper victim either. However, I do think that Rose Myler was, who came after Mary Kelly. But the thing is, Stride, the double event, Catherine Eddowes is a Ripper victim, but Stride, different knife, different MO, and there's two men seen with her. It's not. But anyway, Berry fled up to Aberdeen. Was it Aberdeen? It's either Aberdeen or Dundee. After Rose Myler. And then he killed his wife in a Ripper-style murder and actually wrote about being Jack the Ripper. I mean, so he's either a very good hoaxer or I don't know. It's just he was one of them guys who had a cart with sawdust and all that kind of stuff. So he was there. Anyway, I'll talk to you about this another time. See, I could talk about this all night. Anyway, thank you again for joining me. Please share, please like, and I will see you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.